All right. So first of all, again, apologies for the delay to everybody that joined on time. It's a pleasure, Barry, to see you again.
Thank you. I feel the same.
I will briefly introduce you and then make a small introduction. So first of all, we have today Barry Kerzin. Thank you for accepting the invitation, Barry, who is an American physician, academic, and a Buddhist monk. If I'm not mistaken, you were born and raised in California.
Hollywood.
Hollywood. Right.
Oh.
So Barry has lived, I don't know how, if you were on and off in Dharamsala since 1988.
That's my home since 1988, correct.
That is your home since 1988. Serves and is serving as a personal physician to the 14th Dalai Lama, has studied Buddhism with senior Tibetan scholars, is the founder of the Altruism in Medicine Institute, whose mission is to increase compassion and resilience among healthcare professionals and their patients. He authored Nagarjuna's Wisdom, a practitioner's guide to the middle way that introduces the reader to the basis of Madhyamaka, or middle way thought. And Barry holds affiliations at the University of Hong Kong, at the University of Pittsburgh, and the University of Washington. So thank you, Barry, for joining us. Let me briefly introduce Carlo, who is a theoretical physicist known for his work in quantum gravity, and has also several contributions to the history and philosophy of science. He is the author of several papers, technical literature, but also has penned some very well-received books, even some bestsellers in science popularization, and holds affiliations at the Aix-Marseille University, the Perimeter Institute in Canada, and the Western University in Canada. Carlo is now living mainly in Canada and partly in Marseille. And about myself, my name is Marios. I'm a researcher in quantum physics and gravitational physics. As a disclaimer, I did my PhD studies under the supervision of Carlo, so I know Carlo very well. And I worked in China and Hong Kong, and now at Vienna at the Institute for Quantum Optics and Quantum Information. So first of all, thank you for joining us. All right, so first, let me get up to speed the audience on what this discussion is about. What we would like to do is focus on the question, what is real? Of course, this is a vast topic and everybody would have an opinion on this, I imagine. So I would like to specify this a bit more. We would like to see whether we can explore if the understanding on how to answer this question, what is real, as seen from the Buddhist philosophy point of view, could be pertinent or useful for the metaphysical analysis of modern physics, and perhaps even vice versa. There is only so much that we could uncover in 1 hour, so I expect we will create more questions than answers, but that would already be very good. One word of caution on what this discussion is not for the audience. It's not a lecture on quantum mechanics or a lecture on Buddhist philosophy. We have two personalities from two different backgrounds, and we hope there's going to be an interesting discussion. So after this introduction, which is turning out to not be too short, I will hurry up. We will have a discussion with Barry and Carlo. We shouldn't go on for more than an hour, and then we will take some questions. Please write questions in the questions and answers feature of Zoom. Andrea Di Biagio will choose some. We will not be able to take all of them, probably just a few. Please keep them to the point, what is real, and short and concise. All right, so let me first say why we're here. And first point out that Barry and Carlo have never met before. This is the first time you will discuss. I met Barry at Hong Kong, at Lam Island. It was a chance meeting because we were having both breakfast at the Green Cottage with a view of the sea at Lam Island. It's a very tranquil island next to Hong Kong. Barry was discussing with Yorgos Halkias, which I then became friends with, a professor or a Tibetologist. He's associate professor of Buddhist studies at the University of Hong Kong. And because he's Greek, I just could tell that he's Greek from his accent. I started discussing with him, and we went on for 2 hours with Barry, and Yor was discussing about quantum physics and Buddhism. So a couple of years later, pandemic intervened, I met Carlo at another island, Lam Island, this summer, where we're having dinner, and the discussion turned again to Buddhist philosophy and quantum physics, where I mentioned that I met Barry, and Carlo was very keen to discuss with Barry. So what are the points I wanted to make here? First of all, we came to Barry. And thank you very much for being here to discuss with us. Second point, this is all Carlo's fault, if anything goes wrong. And the third point is that the onus is on us to start the discussion. So Carlo, this is the final introductory point. I want to share a story about you, and then I give it to you. So first of all, I want to say that the first, how to say, course I took with Carlo, I guess, was even before I started my PhD, when he was teaching history and philosophy of physics, first year for students. And he was going on about the Greeks and the ancient Greeks and how that is super important for modern physics. A few years later, I think it was about 2015, I was at your place to talk about a paper on black holes, I think. And you were super excited about this Eastern philosopher. And you were just reading about Nagarjuna. I remember how you were saying that you've been reading about the Greeks of this time, and you didn't know that this guy existed. And if you had known, you would have started from there. And I asked you, okay, if it's so exciting, you've written books about the Greeks, about Anaximander, why don't you write something about Nagarjuna? And you were like, yeah, I don't know how it's going to be received. Because he's not a Western philosopher. You say about the Greeks, everybody's like, yes, the Greeks. But if you say about the Eastern philosophy, they're like, well, is that related at all to Western science? So to start the discussion, I would like to ask you, Carlo, how did you come to be interested in a philosopher that is of profound influence in the Buddhist tradition?
Okay. Thank you, Marius. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you, Barry. Yeah, I remember that moment in which you were at my house and I talk about Nagarjuna. I didn't search for it. Actually, I didn't know anything about Nagarjuna. And I know very little about Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy. So I am Barry, I'm here without any pretension of saying anything beyond extremely superficial about Buddhism. So I apologize for that. In fact, I look forward to getting from you ideas and take away some of my superficiality. I have a lot of Buddhist friends because my Catholic friends back in Italy, many have changed into Buddhism somehow. And you know, I read about main Buddhist idea, but I knew little about Nagarjuna in particular. In fact, I didn't even know that his book existed. But I worked on quantum theory, on the foundation of quantum theory, and I have been fascinated by a particular way of viewing quantum theory, which is called the relational interpretation of quantum theory, in which one of the central ideas is that objects, systems, things, whatever, by themselves do not have properties. In some sense, do not exist by themselves. They only exist because they interact with something else. This is it's an idea which is not completely absent in Western philosophy, but it's not easy to frame in philosophical Western ideas. And I've been writing and talking about relation of quantum mechanics, the relation of interpretation of quantum mechanics. And so many times after a talk, people will come to me and say, have you read Nagarjuna? And I said, no, and I am not particularly excited about attempts to mix, modern physics with Eastern idea, because things I've read about that, I always found very superficial way of putting both. But after, the 20th time I heard, have you read Nagarjuna? I said, well, maybe I should read Nagarjuna. So I read that book in the translation by Garfield, and it was a shock for me. It's an incredible book. It's just a fantastic book. So it really blew away my mind, and I spent a summer immersed in that book, trying to read everything I could get Nagarjuna and thinking about that. And I ended up with two ideas, which I just want to put on the table and to discuss. One smaller, one larger. One smaller is that in Nagarjuna, there are some basic ideas which are helpful to make sense of about quantum mechanics. Not because Nagarjuna knew anything about quantum physics, of course he didn't. But I think that to do science, we need ideas, and philosophy is very useful. And we get from philosophy conceptual structure, way of thinking, that are usual to make sense of better ways of understanding about the world. And what is useful in Nagarjuna is the idea of what is useful for quantum physics, is the idea that it's better to think of the world not as entities or a substance or things or God or whatever, matter that has its own properties, but only through the interdependence of things. So you don't understand anything by itself if not connected to the others. That's, in fact, it's even more. I think what Nagarjuna shows that if you think that there are relations between things, that things affect one another, that's the only way of thinking. So the idea of a thing by itself, of things existing independently of anything else, of a fundamental reality, it's not useful, and I think Nagarjuna argues contradictory. That's a specific idea. The bigger idea, which I found wonderful and that completely captured me, is that this is for me, fascinating philosophical perspective, because it starts from the idea of separating sort of a conventional reality and an ultimate reality, which is very common in a very common perspective also in science and in Western philosophy. You can also read some of the evolution of science or Western philosophy trying to search for this ultimate reality. Is that matter? Is that God? Is that spirit? Is that the mind? Is that language? Is that hermeneutic circles? Is that phenomenology or the Husserl, whatever you want? And Nagarjuna, the book of Nagarjuna is not a positive construction, it's a negative destruction. Every chapter takes away something. Look, this by itself doesn't stay together. This doesn't stay together. It takes away, takes away, takes away. And so the suggestion here is that maybe the question is wrong. We should look for the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality doesn't exist in a sense. It's the same thing as a conventional reality. That I found fantastic. It's dissolving a fake problem in a sense, and opening up a sudden coherence. Nagarjuna, as I read it, and with all my superficiality, is not denying reality. Reality is here. I mean, this pen is this pen. It denies the fact that there's an ultimate reality in this pen or in something on which this pen is based, including the mind, which is there's a superficial Buddhism view of Buddhism in the West, which is just everything is the mind is everything is everything is the self, and everything, Barry, you were born in Hollywood, so the illusory aspect of the world, I wonder if you got it from Buddhism or from Hollywood, I don't know. But there's this idea that, the world is a big cinema and everything is in the mind on the Berkeley. And this is there's a chapter in Nagarjuna which denies that completely, because the mind itself doesn't have an ultimate reality. So you cannot found everything on the mind, nor on the Dharma, nor on anything. Up to the point, and then I conclude. So the reason of my fascination, throwing my fascination from Nagarjuna on the table. In this passage about the view, this comments, the emptiness of emptiness, which was the real moment in which Nagarjuna captured me. So it's a point in which, translated the way I read it, or probably superficially, is that all right? So everything is empty in the sense of not having an intrinsic reality. So therefore, this emptiness is the foundation of everything. And Nagarjuna started towards no, wait. This is a view which is itself empty in the sense that it depends on else. This is suddenly extremely liberating, I think, and I found it hadn't impacted me intellectually. Suddenly, I have a way to take away from my intellectual search and anguish of finding the foundations, which I found liberating, and even personally. I mean, I was thinking about myself not as an entity, but as a combination of other things, has definitely an effect on me, on a human being. And so I guess what finally fascinated me in Nagarjuna is this anti-foundational aspect, is taking away the starting point. It's absolute radicality when he says that nirvana and samsara themselves are illusory in some sense, empty in his own sense, devoid of intrinsic reality. So here I am. I use some of the ideas I got from that book for responding about issues about quantum mechanics, where people tell me, come on, Carlo, you think about quantum mechanics systems, how they affect one another, but the two systems should exist by themselves. This should exist by itself. It's an independent thing. This should be an independent thing. Otherwise, how could they affect one another? And Nagarjuna answered to that. And second point, I am fascinated by the overall anti-foundationalism of Nagarjuna, which I found it extremely liberating. So that's my Nagarjuna. And Barry, apologies if I took something which, of course, is far more important for you than me and misread it or misinterpreted it.
Well, first, let me say I'm very honored to be with you, Carlo, and also Marios, and to be, kind of somehow tangentially connected with the IQOQI and the University of Vienna, and now I understand in Canada, etc. It's a great honor for me to be with you. I remember very clearly our breakfast or our brunch, Marios, that we had on Lam Island several years ago in Hong Kong with Georgios, with Professor Halkias. It was a wonderful time. And you mentioned that we had 2 hours together. For me, the time went like that. I had no idea how long we were together. I know it wasn't a short time, but the time just went like that. It was a very beautiful confluence of people and ideas and enthusiasm and openness. And it stuck with me. So several years later, when you came back at the suggestion of Carlo to have this trilogue, I was very excited and very happy to participate. Carlo, you paint beautiful canvas with many beautiful colors and different size brush strokes. I would say that your understanding is not so superficial. I would also say that I'm no expert. I'm a beginner, but I've been working at this for decades, quite a few decades now. And you've said things that I think would resonate with me as being pretty correct. I didn't see any glaring, areas that I could challenge you on, with my sort of beginning understanding of Madhyamaka and Nagarjuna. I would like to add a context here. So Nagarjuna is he's presenting from the point of view of the Buddha. Now the Buddha lived about 600 years, we don't know exactly, but before Nagarjuna. And when he was 35, he became enlightened. Until his passing at 81, he taught. So there are many, many teachings, and we have, this 100 or so volumes of the classic texts, which are this long and that thick, and you turn them like this. They're written in Sanskrit and Pali that record sometime after the Buddha passed his teachings. And so Nagarjuna is really codifying or kind of trying to, maybe synthesize the teachings of the Buddha, and particularly the Prajnaparamita, the teachings having to do with wisdom. Although Nagarjuna also talks about the compassion side, the bodhicitta, the universal compassion, though not so much in the book that you were referring to, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. Within that larger scope, we often talk about enlightenment. We give an analogy or an illustration of a great soaring bird. And in order to keep aloft, the bird has two wings, and those are likened to wisdom and compassion. So the reason to understand and put into practice Nagarjuna's wisdom of emptiness is really all about compassion, because it's a way that we can be more useful to others in terms of bringing happiness and eliminating suffering. So I think we have to see things in that larger context. You talked about the two truths, which is something very important in Buddhism, taught by the Buddha, and of course in other traditions also talking about wisdom. And that's real crucial. You also talked about, you alluded to the four philosophic schools we say of Tibetan Buddhism, but really this is more Mahayana Buddhism. So Mahayana Buddhism is the type of Buddhism that's practiced looking at the teachings of the Buddha that were recorded in the Sanskrit language and were given by the Buddha in Sanskrit, as opposed to those teachings that were given and recorded in the more common language. Sanskrit was more for the scholars. In the common language was Pali for the general public. And those teachings of the Buddha are the ones that are used or primarily focused upon in the Theravadan schools, which exist in the more southern Asian countries, particularly Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. The northern Mahayana schools are in the northern countries like China, Tibet, Mongolia, Japan, Korea, countries like that. Now, they're all teachings of the Buddha, but there are slightly different emphases. So the emphasis from the Mahayana school is the compassion. There's compassion in both, but there's an emphasis of this bodhicitta, literally the awakened mind. And so mind, we roughly understand, although we don't really, but we have a rough idea. And awakening is kind of, the analogy is with waking up from a dream in sleep. And then, you take the dream to be so real while you're sleeping and dreaming. And as you wake up, as you're going through that little process of waking up, you may be remembering the image, for example, of a dear friend in the dream. And you're feeling this closeness, this love for that dear friend. And as you wake up, you begin to realize, wait a minute, there was no real friend there. That was just a dream. And then that feeling of, that closeness and that love begins to kind of dissipate, recognizing that it wasn't real, it was only a dream. So this is the analogy that's sometimes used for awakening. So the mind of awakening, bodhicitta, is the universal compassion. No one is excluded, no living being is excluded. It involves two parts. One is the compassion and the other is the wisdom. So right away, you can see that wisdom is a subset, or is very much influencing and informing our compassion or deepening our compassion. So along those lines, let me say a few words about compassion. From a Buddhist perspective, particularly Mahayana, but a Buddhist perspective, it's the wish and the action when we can do something to eliminate suffering. So then that begs the issue, well, what's suffering? And again, these are English translation of Sanskrit and Pali. And those languages came and grew up, with Buddhism, Eastern philosophy and Buddhism. English grew up with Christianity or Judeo-Christian traditions. So the words we use in English have very different connotations, but we, not speaking or understanding Sanskrit and Tibetan, then we turn to English. And now the translations and translators are quite good, but still there's that area that it doesn't quite match. So compassion or karuna in Sanskrit or ningje in Tibetan really is looking at, getting rid of suffering for everyone, including ourselves. And so suffering now, as taught by the Buddha and accepted by Nagarjuna, has three levels. The obvious is physical and mental pain. The next, little less obvious, is change. Okay. I had a piece of chocolate cake. I just loved it. It's the best piece of chocolate cake I've ever had. So I go up to the waiter and I say, please, I want another piece of that chocolate cake. And he says, sorry, sir, it's all finished, So the suffering of change or loss when we lose a loved one. Sometimes that change can turn into the opposite. So for example, let's say the waiter said, yes, here's another piece of chocolate cake. Here's a third and a fourth. You enjoy it thoroughly. And then you wake up at 3 a.m. with indigestion. Okay. And then the deepest level is what's maybe more relevant for our discussion. We call it all pervasive. It's a conditioned kind of suffering, and it's conditioned by ignorance. The ignorance that does not understand reality correctly. Okay. And that's really that's the opposite of what we're talking about. When we talk about, shunyata or emptiness, this ignorance is 180 degrees opposite. And that last level of suffering is really the underpinnings of all the other sufferings, okay? So if we can address and remove that level of ignorance, then all the other sufferings fall away. And you could also see it as all of our attachments that get us into trouble, our aversions that can end in anger, hatred, and now we see so much violence in the world, all that, and our selfishness and our greed, and on and on, all that just falls away when we begin to get rid of this ignorance and we begin to not only intellectually understand emptiness, but we put it into our lives. It percolates down and it starts to be part of our attitude, the way we think, the way we feel. It permeates every aspect of our sleep and wake life. And when that happens, it's like a revolution. I don't speak from personal experience because I don't have that. But according to the great saints and masters who have, it's like a total revolution. It's full of joy. It's complete love and compassion. There's no moment where there isn't. And it's always bathed in this wisdom of emptiness, taking things, as you said so beautifully in the beginning of your remarks, Carlo, that everything is in relation. There are no discrete entities at all. There's no independent existence. I think those were the words that were used by David Bohm, who was a very close friend of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's, and as you know, a well-recognized quantum physicist. So those are just some contextual opening remarks to put us in the right ball field, if you will, with an American background, baseball field, right? Could be a soccer field. Yeah.
Thank you very much, both. Carlo, please.
Thank you, Barry. Let me put it this way. This is useful for me enormously, both in terms of context, but also in the most positive way. I take this as a criticism in a positive way, which I'm happy with. Let me translate what you said into a criticism. It's like you were saying, look, Carlo, fine, you find in Nagarjuna something interesting, but you missed some more valuable aspect of what is around there, because the wisdom makes sense together with the compassion, and this, of course, is it's a fault which is common in me and in a lot of intellectual tradition, which I accept and I see, and I take it. And I think that indirectly, what you said did had. I mean, I didn't entirely ignore that, in the sense that, as I write in the chapter which I wrote about Nagarjuna in my book on quantum mechanics, first I go into the strictly use of Nagarjuna or Buddhist interdependence ideas as intellectually relevant for a sort of a useful philosophical background for understanding quantum phenomena, so getting rid of a notion of fundamental stuff, a fundamental reality on which to anchor everything. Second, I talk about the fascination for me of this large, strictly philosophical perspective about what's out there, what is real. But then at the end of the chapter, said, and by the way, this is talking to me at a more large level or more personal level, because it does change my sense of being in the world. And one way in which it does is precisely because it changes my understanding of myself, of the self, and the relational aspect between what I am and the rest of the world, and what I am and the other beings, living beings, or sentient beings around me. Somehow, it suddenly takes away a little bit of the anguish that change, impermanence causes or produces by making me think that there is no permanent me who is threatened by impermanence. And it pushes myself at interpreting myself as a part of a network in which I am I'm produced by the interaction with the others, and it resonates with my larger pre-existing Western political ideas that any interpretation of our human and social life in terms of competition and maximizing our own good, of the good of our own nation, or the good of our own people, against the other, it's badly misleading for ourselves and for everybody for a number of levels. So there is an interdependence of the reading of social human relations, which goes together with this deep interdependence, which is separated, but it resonates. I want to say that because I want to say I'm not totally deaf to the compassion side and the larger side of the story, but I am what I am with my limits and you're a medical doctor, no? Right? You cure the body also, not just focus on that. And I'm a Western intellectual working on physics and on fundamental physics. So in this context, this beautiful context, and this large picture that you have given, what has fascinated me on Nagarjuna is the specific and this book, because this book is what surprised me about this book, this particular book. I've read the others also, some of the others also, the letter. But this book is a lot, somehow Nagarjuna here seems to be closer to me in the sense of focusing on, it's only in the last part of the book that he sort of opened up the topic of the discussion to a more, how would I say, eschatological discourse. For the majority of the book is specific about, I guess, what you call the wisdom size, and is specific about what are the way I read it, at least, what are the main concepts that we use to understand the world. And he shows that these concepts don't hold in some sense, because it's all negative, right? Nagarjuna, the verses of this book here, it's a it's a collection of chapters, I suppose, for the many people in the audience who have not read it or don't know about it. It's a short book, it's a collection of chapters in which it works on logic essentially, and shows, look, if you if you take this entity as existent, you get into a contradiction for this and this reason, and it slowly demolishes all the possible foundations of our thinking. Not only object, but also causation itself, also time itself, also the self itself, and so on and so forth, one by one, showing that thinking that they are foundational, they have intrinsic existence, doesn't hold. So this is if I get it right in your large pictures, this is the wisdom part of the story, which, as you say, makes sense because of the larger story. But this is the part which has fascinated me. This is the part that has captured. We're all limited, and we look at one detail at a time. I have look. I think that I don't know how to put it. Yeah, let me put it bluntly. Do you think that there's anything wrong? Let's put it bluntly this way: in trying to take that from the Nagarjuna and letting this bit of wisdom, small bit of wisdom that I can get out of it, influence the rest, but using it directly, because I think that's what I think is my contribution. Somehow, look, there is in this large aspect of good philosophy, there's a part of it which is definitely very relevant for modern physics, because it could be used for it, and for modern philosophy. And you know, there are people in modern philosophy, there are people in Cambridge, there are people in the US, not only Garfield, but Western and others who are using idea from the Nagarjuna in a philosophical context. I think there's this dialogue, and I don't know if anything could be useful in the other direction in a sense, but it's you know, I think culture is a dialogue. It's a dialogue in which we keep learning from else, whether it's a tradition, whether it's a different school, whether it's nature itself, because we interact, whether there's us talking to one another. This constant exchange that, in my opinion, makes the beauty of culture, but also that's how we learn, that's how we know, that's how we change. And in a sense, once again, all this is it's relational. It's how we influence one another.
Well, first, let me say that you know, I think it's very beautiful, the discoveries that you've made, the journey that you've made, the courage to do that as a quantum physicist, being suggested by some of your students, or at least colleagues or audience people when you give talks, to read Nagarjuna, that you actually did, and that you actually went into it, and you actually spent time with it. You've thought a lot about this. And as I said before, I think your understanding, at the level that we're talking, not that I understand it much more, but the level that we're talking, I think, is very clear and very excellent. And the fact that it's had some impact on your life, you said less angst, you can see yourself much more relational, in relationship to others and events, etc. And that changes something inside of you in a positive way. I mean, this is beautiful. And I would encourage you, of course, to continue with that. You're quite unique. There are maybe a few quantum physicists that have interest, and but few that I think have really read Nagarjuna, particularly from the beginning to the end of his, opus magnus, his major treatise of the six. We have all of those actually translated into English, and some of them will deal more with the compassion side also. So I applaud you for that, and I feel very, very happy and in a way connected with you, partly because of that, and partly because we're connected now having this lovely conversation. Allow me for a moment to dive in a little bit. You've made many points here, and let me sort of dive in on a few that I wanted to make comments on. So the first, and so that I won't forget, the next one is going to be the 4 philosophic schools. I mentioned that, you also touched on that. Let's flesh that out a little bit. But before we do that, let me talk about something that's even more fundamental, and helps us to understand the progression of thinking through those 4 schools to what's usually considered the most sophisticated, the Madhyamaka school. And that is the distinction, which is really important, between existence and intrinsic existence, and the distinction between no existence and no intrinsic existence. So these distinctions, if one doesn't fully comprehend the Madhyamaka system, not fully comprehend, but have some idea of the Madhyamaka system, one then usually is not able to make these distinctions. So let's talk about them for a moment. So existence, when we talk about existence, we talk about our ordinary understanding of what's real, okay? That things are objects. Things are, they may be in relationship, but what's in relationship are 2 different distinct objects or entities that are in relationship. And that's kind of our normal understanding of existence. So lacking inherent existence or intrinsic existence begs the issue to understand what is intrinsic existence, okay? And that's the object of negation for the Buddha, for Nagarjuna, and for all those following in this tradition of Nagarjuna, the Madhyamaka school. And so that's not so easy to wrap our heads around, what is intrinsic existence. In a way, it's so close that we miss it. It's a little bit like, staying in a new hotel room in a new city, waking up and looking for your glasses and you can't find them, and then realizing that they're already on your face. And so intrinsic existence is things existing independently, things existing through relationship, things not things existing dependently, not independently. And so if we look at dependence now, we can look at that at several levels. And the more obvious level is, you've mentioned that, Carlo, is cause and effect, causality, okay? But there are also more subtle levels of dependence that the Buddha and Nagarjuna talk about and are really central to the philosophy. So the second level is the relationship between whole and parts parts to whole. It goes both ways, okay? That's a little bit, another level, if you will, of dependence. particularly, highlighted by Nagarjuna. And then the third level, which is the most subtle level, the subtlest level, which is really what we have to start to understand, because the opposite of that is this independent or intrinsic existence, okay? So this third level we call dependence through designation, or sometimes called dependent designation, but it's dependence through designation. It's a type of naming or labeling. So for example, Barry, we label or name Barry. My parents gave this name to Barry based on a body, okay? Maybe a little tiny infant body at that time, right? And also in terms of maybe some kind of behaviors or, how they thought this emotional structure is for this little baby, right? He's very calm, or he's very, he acts out a lot, he's very active, or, all those things. So upon all that, a name is placed, in this case, Barry, okay? So that relationship of, dependence through designation is really what Nagarjuna is talking about when we talk about dependence. And so that's very important to understand. So the opposite of that, coming back to understanding this inherent or intrinsic existence, there are many words in English we use synonymous for rangxing kimepa, not existing intrinsically or inherently or independently or from its own side. Those are all synonyms to the Tibetan terminology that I just mentioned. So when people don't have a good appreciation for intrinsic existence, and you say then, so the second, there were two comparisons. The second comparison is non-existence and not inherently existent. So when Nagarjuna says no inherent existence, what often people interpret is no existence at all, and they fall into a nihilism, that nothing exists at all. So they haven't fully appreciated this notion of intrinsic existence. So they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? When we're throwing out or negating intrinsic existence, they don't quite understand what that fully means. They think it's all of existence, and therefore they, think that nothing exists. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's
Can I
yes,
interject
please.
something before you go
Please.
ahead? You promised us the four schools, but can I make a comment here?
Of course.
About it to say, because
this is free flow. So
yeah.
Please.
So we gave the title "What is Real" to this, and I that seems to me that distinction that you made between existence and intrinsic existence, inherent existence, is it's the idea that I found central and centrally useful for me for the following reason. First of all, the notion of reality, the notion of existence here are close. What exists is what is real. What is that? Let me articulate. I want to say a couple of things. One is that we make a distinction between illusory and real in our everyday life, which is well founded. If I see the chair and there is a mirror there, and I see a chair sort of the other side of the mirror, there's a precise sense in which the chair in which is the other side of the mirror is not real, while this chair is real. This distinction has a meaning, because I can sit on that chair, I can touch that one, but I cannot sit on that and touch that one. But then we realize that some aspects of what is illusory in the chair in the mirror also are shared by the chair which I just called real, which is also illusory in some other sense. For instance, the fact of being a chair, it's
Internet cut out and back on, so I missed you up until now. Please, could you repeat it?
Oh, from where did you miss me?
When you were saying this distinction between existence and inherent existence and non-existence and non-inherent existence is very helpful. And then after that,
yeah.
I lost you.
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple of points. One is that we use a distinction between illusory and real in everyday life. For instance, we say that a chair in which I sit is a chair in which I sit is real, while the chair in the mirror is illusory. But then I was saying, of course, then through science, we realize that there are illusory aspects in the chair, which I just called real as well. But then one is tempted, and that's to say, all right, so there are many illusory aspects of that chair, but there is a more fundamental level in which there is a description of what is going on there, which is a real one. And Eddington made it very, very vividly in a well-known distinction between the scientific table and the everyday table, when he says, look, I have there are two tables there. There's a table on which I eat, which is solid, and then there's a table which I view with my scientific eyes, which is made by atoms and is not solid. There's a lot of emptiness, not emptiness in Nagarjuna sense, empty in a completely different sense.
I've heard that emptiness is 99.9 to the 12th power, empty
right.
space in the atom. Is that
right? Yes, yes. But that's of course not Nagarjuna emptiness. That's just the lack of presence of atoms.
Yeah.
And Eddington says, and people use that by saying the chair of my the chair on which I sit, the solid chair is illusory. The real chair is the atoms. This way of using the notion of real and the notion of existence, so what exists is the atoms, is dangerously misleading. That's what because it pushes us to try to resolve the relational and illusory aspect of reality that we see in terms of some basic fundamental physical reality from which to derive it. Mm-hmm. Or in Western subjective idealism, in terms, and its derivation, in terms of some sort of fundamental mind or fundamental subject, which is a real existing entity, the Cartesian mind that is certain of existing itself, or the Kantian subject, or even the fundamentality of the perception itself in Husserl and in phenomenology. So there is this Western need to anchor what we mean by real, of something final. So to realize that there is dependence, but then there is some basic grounds on which everything builds up, on which to sit. And this is what I take emptiness, the notion of emptiness, the Nagarjuna notion of emptiness, to be useful, to get rid of this urge of finding beyond the illusory aspect of the world a basic level which is not real in the sense of in which this chair is real compared to the chair in the mirror, but real in a fundamental way. So the bottom line of the story, the solid terrain on which to anchor, the ultimate, the end point of the line of dependence. The line of dependence ends to some point. That's what is real. And whatever it is, Nagarjuna, is that's a wrong question. I mean, it's not only that the table is empty because I can understand it's something else, but it's also that something else is also empty because I can understand it's something else. Until the point in which there is this emptiness itself. It's empty because we shouldn't take it as a fundamental sort of metaphysical principle on which to ground all the rest. So this is I just want
putting
to
this in slightly different terminology, emptiness is what allows functionality. Emptiness is the lack of any kind of essence, even on a atomic level. And I agree with you, what you said. That's, I think, very true.
Right.
When
And
we
this is an
look at the chair, when we look at the chair versus the reflection of the chair in the mirror, that gets a little more complicated, because both of them, of course, lack any independent existence. Both, okay, they're both empty in terms of shunyata. Having said that, the metaphor that the Buddha used, he gave about 10 different metaphors for something to be illusory, and one of the important ones that he used was reflection. He used the reflection of the moon, or the full moon in the still water, that it looks like the moon, but in fact, of course, it's not. It's a reflection. He used such things as water of a mirage, sound of an echo, and things like that to illustrate. Okay, now let me mention 2 experiments, if I may, and you correct me where I'm wrong. I'm a pop physicist from the New York Times, okay? And one is the thought experiment of Edwin Schrödinger, okay? The so-called Schrödinger cat paradox, or thought experiment. And you have double steel box in which you have a cat. There's no doors, no windows, right? And you have a vial of very powerful acid that's connected to a radioisotope. The half-life of the isotope is the same duration as the duration of your experiment, your thought experiment. So the chance of the cat, so if the radioactive material decays, 50% chance, it somehow pulls a lever and the acid spills, killing the cat. If that radioisotope does not decay, there's no spillage of the acid, and the cat remains alive. So quantum physicists call this superposition, where the cat is both alive and dead. When you crack open this steel box, then you observe what's inside, and then the cat is either dead if the radioisotope decayed and knocked over the acid, or it's alive. It didn't, okay? And it's either or. Whereas when you can't observe it, it's both. It's superposition. Okay. Second is the double slit. You shoot these electrons or photons, through 2 slits in a metal thing, and then you have a screen behind, and you look at the pattern. And if you have a little camera or an observation device at the slit, the level of the slits, observing, you find a pattern below on the back on the screen that suggests what passed through the slits were particles. Whereas if you remove the observation device, you have an interference pattern suggesting what went through the slits were waves, okay? So these 2 experiments, at least in my very, superficial understanding, tell us that observer dependence is very important in terms of reality, okay? That whether or not there is or isn't, or maybe you can, what type of observer, presence there is, very much influences and determines what's real. And so that then jumps into the 4, Buddhist schools of philosophy. If we go from the so-called least sophisticated up, the third one would be the one you alluded to. That's somewhat similar to Bishop Berkeley in the West and other idealists that say that everything is consciousness, everything is mind, and things that seem to be solid out there in an external reality are nothing more than projections of our mind. And that's actually a very sophisticated philosophy. It's a very sophisticated philosophy. One of the things it starts to do is it breaks down this notion of a solid external reality, okay? But its critique, as you also mentioned, is that it takes the mind, to be somehow, absolute or ultimate, existing. And so then the highest, if you will, most sophisticated school of Madhyamaka says, well, what the Chittamatrans, the mind-only school, says, that's correct up to a point, but the criticism is there's no, absoluteness about the mind either. So then you end up with that you accept an external reality, you accept a mind, but both, that is, every existent thing exists without having any exist in relationship without having any independence or objectivity. And so that's very roughly, at least the last two of the three Buddhist schools. The third one is divided again into Prasangika Madhyamaka and Svatantrika Madhyamaka, using Tibetan terms that are borrowing from the Sanskrit. And the Prasangika Madhyamaka is considered the most sophisticated, where nothing at all has intrinsic existence. Whereas the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, they say that some conventional reality does exist from its own side, having some essence. So there's a little bit of a distinction and a debate there. So just wanted to mention those things. I'd like you to comment, if you would, on some of the quantum physics, and bring that in as we come to the near the end of our hour, transition to our questions. And you please allow me, I'm almost out of battery, so I'm going to have to move my computer and get plugged in. And I'll be listening to you intently, I promise.
Okay, do you want me to talk or to wait?
Yeah, please. No, go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay, good. So first of all, let me comment on your quantum physics. I have only one objection.
Please.
I think it's what you said about the two sort of prototypical quantum puzzles, which is Schrödinger cat and the double slit experiment. It's perfect. My only objection is that in my book, I describe, of course, I have a chapter about Schrödinger cat, but I don't use a situation in which the cat is dead or alive. I prefer a situation in which the cat is asleep or awake, just because I don't like killing cats, even in mental experiments. So up to that, replacing a sleep cat with a dead cat, I think I completely agree. And let me come to the serious part of the answer. What you mentioned as the passage from the third and the fourth between among the sort of the versions of Buddhist philosophy, it's exactly what I think is relevant for quantum mechanics for the following reason. We read in quantum mechanics books that we should not think about the mechanical description of reality, but the description of reality with respect to the observer. And there's always this notion in books that there's an observer or the apparatus that measures. So it's but I am a scientist which view the world from the perspective of modern science, where one way of viewing the world is that there are billions and billions of galaxies, each one with billions and billions of stars, probably with planets all around. And from that perspective, the observer in any quantum mechanical experiment is just one piece in the big story. So I have found the Berkeley subjective idealism profoundly unconvincing from the point of view of a scientist, because there is an aspect of naturalism which in which I grew up as a scientist, which refuses to say that to understand quantum mechanics, we have to bring in our mind. Quantum mechanics is not something that has directly to do with our mind, has not something directly to do about any observer, any apparatus, because we use quantum mechanics for describing what happened inside the sun, the reaction, the nuclear reaction there, or galaxy formations. So I want to think quantum mechanics in a way. I think quantum mechanics is experiments not about psychology, not about our mind, not about consciousness, not about anything like that. It has to do about the world. It might question what we mean by real world. That's fine, because science repeatedly was forced to change its own ideas about the real world. So if if to make sense of quantum mechanics, I have to think that the cat is awake or asleep only when a conscious observer, a mind, interacts with this, I say no, that's not. There are interpretations of quantum mechanics that go in that direction. They require either.
Am I correct to say the Copenhagen school does?
Copenhagen school talk about the observer without saying what is observer. But the Copenhagen school, which is the way most textbooks are written, describe any quantum mechanical situation in terms, okay, there is an observer making a measurement, and we're talking about the outcome of the measurements. So yes, it assumes an observer, but it's very vague about what an observer is. Some more sharp interpretation, like cubism, take this notion of observer to be very fundamental. It's an agent, somebody who thinks about and can compute the future. So that's a starting point for doing the rest. I've always been unhappy with that, because things happen on the sun when there is nobody that is an observer in anything. And I want to have a way of thinking the world that things happen there independently of me, so to say. They might depend on one another, but why should they depend on me? And who am I? Or, what the observer should be a white Western scientist with a PhD? Or, should we include women? Should we include people without PhD? Should we include cats? Is a cat an observer? Should we include a fly? It's just not something I understand.
So these are also cultural differences, Carlo, because in the Western cultures, generally, it's the individual. In Eastern cultures, generally, it's the group. And no one wants to, at least traditionally, step out or seen separate from the group. And so the identity of an observer from a Western perspective would more be an individual person, whereas from a Eastern perspective, it would really be a group. And so there are some cultural distinctions here also. I just wanted to interject that.
Could I comment at this point, Carlo? I would like to insist a bit on this, because I'm not quite clear on whether you are agreeing or not on the question of the mind.
Well, let me get that.
Thank you. This is also, I wanted to ask him the same question, Mario.
So Marius, phrase the question specifically.
All right. So since we're talking about Nagarjuna now, I would also like to read some simple verses that he has, and get both from Barry and you what you think. So this is from chapter 3, Examination of the Senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and mind are the 6 sense faculties. Their spheres are the visible objects, etc. Like the seen, the heard, the smelled, the tasted, and the touched, the hearer, sound, etc. And consciousness should be understood. So actually, I'm confused from both of you. First of all, Barry, is the mind anything special in Buddhist philosophy? Or is it just like seeing and hearing? And Carlo, are you saying there is anything special about the mind?
I want to hear Barry answer in detail, but let me just answer shortly first, and because that's exactly where I was going in the previous thing I wanted to say. There's a crucial distinction between what Barry called 3 and 4. That's what captured me. So if we take the mind as fundamental, as existing, the only existing thing, where the movie of the world is reflected into, I am not happy. My culture rejects that as a useless point of view to do science. That's the point. But there is an alternative, much more interesting, and I find much more deep, in which I read in Nagarjuna, which is what Barry seems to me is calling the 4th alternative, in which the mind is not the fundamental thing in which everything is reflected. It's just one part of this interdependence. Now, namely, it's not the things have not intrinsic existence, but mind has intrinsic existence. That's not there's a more interesting answer, namely that mind itself has no intrinsic existence. And so it's just, it has an existence, but of course it's an existence. My mind exists, I exist. But, and if I think in terms of groups, it's the same. I mean, all sentient beings or all human beings, whatever, together, which is an idea also in some Western philosophy, that, you know, it's collectively that through language and that we create a vision of the world. But I want to think of this as one aspect of the ensemble of things, which is existence, where nothing of that has intrinsic existence. So I want to think my mind is my brain, my sensation, my love, people loving me, the image that people have of me, the set of processes which are part of the world. And it seems to me that Nagarjuna allows me to think at me as part of the world at the same sense, at the same ground as the world being reflected in my consciousness, without having to choose one of the two perspectives to be the true one, the intrinsic existence. All perspectives are empty. They're all good, but they're not the one on which the rest is ground. Each of one I can understand dependently of something else.
So Marios, you read a verse or two from the 3rd chapter of Nagarjuna, and let me comment on that, please. And the question you were asking was, what is mind or consciousness? So here we're using the words synonymously. And from a Buddhist perspective, there are 6 what we call primary minds, and then there's a whole slew of secondary minds. And some of the more common systems include 51 in the secondary minds. Now, please understand that mind, like everything else that exists in the world, doesn't exist permanently. It exists, I mean, there are a few exceptions, okay, but essentially everything that exists in the world is not permanent. Therefore, it's changing moment to moment. Therefore, everything exists as a continuum, including mind. So that means there'll be a moment of mind followed by a next moment of mind, etc. And the next moment of mind is determined primarily, but not solely, by the previous moment of mind. So from that, we can extrapolate a continuum, an infinite continuum. And mind is an infinite continuum from perspective of Buddhism. And that means that suggests rebirth, and it suggests we've had infinite rebirths. There's been no beginning. And so this then comes up again with the notion of a beginning creator, if you will, a so-called, God. There's some problems here to resolve this. And so mind is a continuum, it's infinite. Now, each moment of mind is made up of a primary mind and a constellation of secondary minds. These 6 primary, or the 5, as you read from Nagarjuna, the 5 sensory minds of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, tactile, right? These 5, plus what's sometimes called the mental consciousness. And that has different levels of subtlety. On the grossest level is thinking. If we go a little bit deeper, a little bit more subtler, we have dream mind, which seems like these senses are active, but actually when we're sleeping, the senses are inactive. So it's just something coming from our 6th or mental consciousness that seems like the senses are active in dream mind. That dream mind is a little more subtle than awake mind, awake thinking mind. And then if we go more subtle, we're talking now again about awake mind, we talk about intuition. When we're in intuition, we're not thinking, right? It's a non-conceptual mind in that sense. And deeper yet, our minds we call non-conceptual and non-dual, where there's no awareness of a subject or an object. So subject-object non-duality. So that's kind of the rough sort of, lay of the land of what, Buddhism thinks about mind. Now, each of those moments, let's say, for example, I'm talking. So my primary mind now is going to be an auditory mind, okay? And then there's going to be a whole constellation of next secondary ones, which are basically positive and negative, or harmful, positive, non-harmful, and harmful, qualities or attributes or emotions or thoughts or attitudes. And then the next moment, I'm looking at my screen. So I have a visual mind, and the constellation will change, some of those positive and negative qualities. Like I'm feeling a little sleepy, or I'm very alert, or I'm feeling jealous, or I'm feeling very happy and connected, with this conversation. Those would be part of the secondary minds. And then, you have this infinite continuum. Every living being, as you rightfully said, sentient being, so living being with a mind, Carlo, has its own mental continuum. So it involves, it's a big picture of mind. It involves, our thinking, it involves our intellect, it involves our heart, feelings, emotions, and it involves those deeper levels in that sixth primary mind, mental consciousness, such as intuition and deeper minds. Now, when we die, we go through 8 stages according to the Buddhist understanding. And each of those stages, the first 4, the elements, the sort of solidity, if you will. We know they're not solid, but from a conventional perspective, the solidity elements, the liquidity elements, the thermodynamic elements, the movement, the kinetic elements, those all dissolve as we die in the first 4. And when that 4th one happens, there's no more circulation of blood or of air, so we don't breathe, we have no circulatory, blood pressure, so we're declared clinically dead. But there's 4 more stages we go through, and those are when the mind becomes successively subtler. And those are when we get into the non-dual minds that are the most subtle minds. And the last 8th stage, it's called Wuser in Tibetan, and we translate that as luminosity or clear light. It's not light, it's not, but it's the most utter clear mind. And that mind, if it goes on, if we don't die, if we meditate on that luminosity and sustain it through our meditation infinitely, we become a Buddha. And that's why the Buddha is sometimes called an enlightened Buddha is a deathless state, because you don't actually die. So those would be the non-conceptual and non-dual minds. And just for completeness, those last 4 minds are called, and these are technical terms, so it won't make much, it won't give you much understanding. White appearance, red increase, black near attainment, and then this wuser, this luminosity. So that's kind of the roadmap, if you will, for mind. And it's not the brain. Now, on the gross level of thinking and our sensory minds, there's a very close connection with, with the brain, okay? But when you die, the brain is supposed to be dead and you're still alive, okay? And so these more subtle minds are not related actually to the brain. So we could really say that mind is experience, it's awareness, it's knowing, not knowing something, but the act of knowing. So the qualities of mind, the most important qualities are awareness and clarity. So that gives you just some rough idea of the Buddhist understanding of mind or consciousness.
I see. Yeah, Carlo, would you like to comment? I was going to ask about time and the experience of time, if you would like to go to that. Yeah.
I can comment one thing about this, what Barry said about mind, which is not something I've studied, which does resonate to me very, very strongly and very interesting. And that's and I found very interesting. And then I go to time because it's very much related. When Mario, you asked Barry, so what is mind? I was particularly struck by the fact that Barry didn't say the mind is this, this, and that. Okay, Barry said, well, the mind is many things. Look, there's this and this and this and this and this, and there's a sort of layers also, in some sense, in which we can talk about it or have some understanding, partial maybe understanding about it or some wisdom about it. And this layering, I find it's absolutely brilliant from my perspective, because it dissolves the wrong question, which is what is the mind period? what is the thing which is mine? Here is the thing which is mine. Let's just define it, characterize it, and understand what it is. That's a wrong way of thinking about it. It's when we think about our mind, of course we think something unites somehow. A set of processes that happen into me, and it's about my thinking, my emotions. But it's not one thing. It's a complicated layer. There's many layers of discussion possible about that. I don't want to enter into the specific, but I found this fascinating. And let me go to time immediately, because it's deeply related. I wrote a book on time, which is the Audio of Time, in which
this Carlo is very timely, because we're also kind of running low on time.
That's absolutely. And in the book, I sort of try to collect everything we have learned about time from science, from special relativity, from general relativity, statistical mechanics, from other pieces, and what we tentatively learn about time with quantum gravity, which is my specific field. Once again, you have to sort of put your hands on the notion of time. And the main message of the book, in fact, the single message of the book, is that the question of what is time is a wrong question. Because when we think about time, we think about a single thing, okay? We think we have a totally clear idea about time. Time is a single thing that flows from the past to the future, and the past influences the present to the future. In the present, this is how things are. Reality is the present, the entire universe is a real state in that. And we learn from science that this way of viewing time is just wrong. It's factually wrong. Okay, it's not true that we all proceed together from moment A to moment B, and the amount of time lapsed between A and B is the same for everybody, and so on and so forth. Because we learned from experiences, special relativity, general relativity, statistical mechanics, and other things. So the way to think about time is that it's a very layered thing. Well, this thing we call time is made by layers, conceptually. And when we look at larger domain, that the one of our usual experience, some layers are lost. So some aspects, some properties of what we call time are only good, are only appropriate for describing the temporal experience we have if we don't move too fast, if we don't look too far away, if you don't look at the atoms too in detail as the single degrees of freedom, and so on and so forth. So the notion of time opens up in a set of layers which become increasingly general only if you go down to the bottom level. Some aspect of time, like the universality of time, only makes sense if we don't go to fast velocities, for instance. So this is a similarity, and that's why the opening up of what the mind is into layers seems to be the right direction to go. Right? When if I ask, does a cat has a mind or does a fly has a mind? It seems to me that the only answer is to get out of the idea that the answer is either yes or no. I mean, I suppose that certainly a cat has a certain, sleepy feeling in the morning and the moment of joy when he sees his fellow cats. But I suppose a cat doesn't go through a complicated intellectual game of trying to understanding what is reality and debating about that. So there is some aspect in common, other not. We have to break up this notion in pieces. Once again, I mean, the topic is what is real. If we start by saying time is real, it's a beautiful chapter, Nagarjuna, why you cannot say that time is an intrinsic existence, we just get it wrong. If we think, well, then atoms are real, or the mind is real, all these answers, we got it wrong. Then we can say that things are real in a conventional sense, within a context, and then when we try to realize what we mean by something is real, this is certainly real in a conventional sense, but we realize that the reality of this object itself, it gets sort of broken up into interdependence between this object and else, and its different layers, and that's the reality that as a scientist I can deal with, not the ultimate reality, the conventional reality. Of course, conventional reality is real, as Barry was saying. This is not a negation of reality. It's a freedom from the idea of the ultimate reality, the ultimate sort of intrinsic, inherent reality being there in terms of which building all the rest.
May I say a few words about time, and I'll keep it brief because I see we have a lot of people in the chat who have questions. It would be nice to turn to them. Let me make a few comments, if I may, about time from Nagarjuna's perspective. There is no time. I don't think I can be more brief. And how does he support that? He says, well, when you're in the present moment, there's no past and there's no future. If you dissect the present moment, even to a more granular present moment, some of that's going to be past, some of that's going to be yet to come. And then you have even a finer, more granular present moment. If you keep going on with that granularity, you end up having no time. You have no past, no future, and no present. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, some of the arguments or logic that Nagarjuna uses to establish no time. Now, of course, what he means is there's no absolute time. There's no time on there's no essence of time. There is, time from the perspective of conventionality. Cause and effect is reciprocal. So when we have a cause, we have an effect, or we know there's going to be an effect. But also from the point of view of the effect, the result, we know that there must have been a cause. So this reciprocality is something unique to the highest school of Prasangika Madhyamaka, within the fourth highest school of Madhyamaka. I just wanted to mention that to round out one of our previous discussions. And it would be wonderful if we can to turn to some of the questions.
Yes, we will. Thank you very much, Barry. We will now turn to the questions. But I wanted one quick comment, now that we're on time, on the discreteness of time, because I am a bit confused about this. You talked both about a continuum. You were talking about the mind, of course, that exists in moments. You're talking about the continuum and infinite continuum, but at the same time about some sort of steps, which is what we would say discreteness in physics. And I'm just curious, what is how is time, although it does not exist ultimately, imagined in Buddhist philosophy?
So you're very astute, Marios. My description of time comes from the Abhidharma literature, and the philosophic school would be probably one of the two lower ones, not the mind only or the Madhyamaka, yeah? So you have to understand that, number one. Number two, the understanding of time as I presented it from the logic used by Nagarjuna is from the highest school, okay? So from, he is negating so much of what we take to be absolutely real, and we take time to be absolutely real. However we carve it up and whatever descriptors or properties we use for it, we take it automatically to be something that has an essence. And Nagarjuna is using the logic I mentioned: no past, no future, only the present. You get finer and finer with your present, and you have no present anymore either. So therefore no past. So that's what he's doing here. He's trying to negate, showing the contradiction between in understanding time to have some essence.
Okay, thank you very much. So this reminds me a bit of the talks in your group, Carlo. I had prepared like 6 pages of questions and comments in case you get stuck and the discussion is not going anywhere, and it's been 1.5 hours. And it's, so that is very nice. Thank you very much. Let's go to the second part. I didn't stop you because this is exactly what we wanted to do, right? It just happened. I would like to take a couple of questions from a few specific people first. Please, let's keep it quick. Let's start with Yorgos, if he's still here. Yes. Yorgos, can you hear us? No. Yes, he should now. I think you will have to unmute.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me? Can you see me? It's so nice. Hi, Barry. Hi, Mario. Hi, Carlo. It's so nice to be with you. Let me just. Oh, there I am. I can see myself, so maybe you can see me as well.
Yes, we can see you. So let me remind you, I started the story. I met Barry with Yorgos at Lama. Yorgos is a Tibetologist, specifically an assistant professor of philosophy of, excuse me, no, I got it wrong. This is Amit. I'm sorry, Yorgos. Tibetologist at the Hong Kong University.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you for having this very interesting talk. I mean, you covered such profound topics, and I think, of course, the time is very limited. I don't really have any. I have more. I just wanted to summarize some things that you said, and I wanted to start first with the notion, of course, that that Barry mentioned about the Madhyamika school. Of course, the Prasangika Madhyamika becoming the dominant, the most important superior philosophical view in Tibet. Of course, we must bear in mind that that was a later development, that early on in Tibet, we have with such figures, Indian figures as Santaraksita, an attempt to combine Yogacara and Madhyamika, a synthesis between the two schools, which, as Barry said, they're very profound. I mean, I think Yogacara, I'll come back to this because it really relates to the notion of consciousness and the importance of consciousness in this discussion about what is real. I think it's not something we can get rid of. It's not something we can say it's not primary to our discussion or it doesn't play an important role. So eventually, of course, the evolution is that the Prasangika Madhyamika school by most Tibetan schools is considered the highest view. And of course, Nagarjuna is the exponent of that position. Now, I think we must bear in mind that any sort of verbalization about reality is dependent on consciousness. It's not possible to have a discussion about what is real and not have consciousness in the discussion, especially when we are to verbalize it. I mean, of course, any reality that is independent of consciousness, is not dependent on consciousness, is beyond verbalization. And I think the Buddhist position is very clear on that. And I think Nagarjuna, if I read him correctly, is very clear that when it comes to the ultimate reality, it's something that actually we cannot talk about. And basically all discussion, all discourse is very much within the level of the conventional real. So this is a very interesting, I think, a point that I wanted to make, that I think I can also raise it as a point for the two of you to respond from your respective perspectives. Because if consciousness, from my understanding, is primary to this discussion of what is real, and if consciousness does not inherently exist, right? Well, at least, I mean, Barry also talked about the different kinds of minds. Then how does all this discussion about what is real, what kind of claims can we ultimately make about what is reality? Now, I think I have a feeling that Carlos comes from a different perspective than Barry in answering that question. So I'd like to really point to this question about, can we make any claims about reality? And if so, based on what, from your respective disciplines? So that's my my question and
Thank you,
comments
Yorgos.
to you. Yeah.
Who would like to go first?
Happy
Carlos?
to. Carlos, you want to? Please.
Let me put it this way. I don't buy the argument. I don't buy the argument. We cannot have a discussion about reality unless it's a discussion that is consciousness involved. But all the discussions that I know about reality, as far as I know, happened through sounds or writing in which atoms were moving. So we cannot have a discussion without atoms, right? And so on. I could. So then atoms are fundamental? No. The fact that something it's part of our discussing about this doesn't mean that it's primary with respect to the rest. I think we have to take this. That's my own personal view of that. So of course we talk about from within our consciousness, of course. And of course, we have information about reality from within our senses. And of course, we talk in English, we talk in Tibetan, we talk in Pali. But that's not because English, Tibetan, and Pali, or consciousness of atoms, are a necessary starting point for understanding the rest. I think it's that's exactly what I read in Nagarjuna's chapter about the self. We recognize its dependence of I would say levels of the pieces of the story one with respect to the other one, and but also at a clear logical analysis. This is what Nagarjuna does. None of this stands up as primary with respect to the other. That's my reading.
Professor Halkias, Georgios, my dear friend and colleague, I agree with you. When we talk about reality, we are talking not about reality. We're talking about reality. It's not reality. Because language, words, all that is, and that is not the reality of Nagarjuna. Nevertheless, it's very useful because without this conventional reality of words and concepts that are correct in understanding Nagarjuna, without that, it's very difficult for us to have that experience, that non-conceptual experience of reality. So, there's a kind of a metaphor that's used is you take a boat and you cross the river and then you leave the boat. Or the other analogy is you're out in the forest and it gets cold and you take two sticks and you rub them together, and with the friction you get fire, and the fire then burns the sticks. So the sticks are conceptuality, as was the boat that got you across the river. Not any conceptuality, but very clear understanding of Nagarjuna and of course the Buddha, his discussion on the Buddhist wisdom.
Thank you. I would like to bring one more person to discussion. First of all, the reason I confuse your affiliations is because you're both at the University of Hong Kong. So let me correct Georgios. He's scholar of Tibetan and Himalayan studies, comparative religions and Buddhism, associate professor of Buddhist studies at the University of Hong Kong. And we also have Amit Shadurveli that I would like, do you have a comment or a question? Who is an assistant professor of Buddhist philosophy at the University of Hong Kong.
And incidentally, also a resident of Lama Island. And
yes, that's right.
So actually, at the moment, I'm in Vienna, and I was only coincidentally found that Marios has relocated here as
There's
well.
Too many coincidences.
We're all very entangled.
Yes.
So I have a question. Perhaps Carlo, you can speak to this. I wonder what you think about this aspect of Madhyamaka philosophy that I've found difficult to take on board in my own to accept. And so I can grant so that particles in the sun are not ultimately real. They don't have intrinsic existence, in that somehow they depend on each other for their existence. They're all, in whichever way you break that down in contemporary quantum physics. There's no intrinsic, they're all ontologically, causally dependent upon each other. So in the quote unquote lower schools of Indian Buddhism that Barry alluded to, the ones that still maintain some belief in swabhava or intrinsic nature, they too will think that yes, everything is causally dependent because everything is dependently originated, so that you have these momentary entities. So a fire atom, or if not even an atom, but a quality of heat arises from a previous quality of heat, or whatever. You have these momentary entities flitting in and out of existence, but they all are intrinsically real. They have swabhava in that they have causal power. They have the ability to do something, and that is really what their existence consists of, or is constituted by, is this causal power that they have in and of themselves. Not in and of themselves in that, nothing produced them. They are causally dependent upon their, the conditions that gave rise to them. But they have some intrinsic nature, some essence, loosely speaking, in that they have this thing that they're going to do just by virtue of their existing. Now, and so Madhyamaka will come along and, very roughly speaking, deny that even this type of intrinsic nature is acceptable in their analysis. Because so let's say you grant that, okay, they're causally dependent, but they have intrinsic nature. Still also, there's some sense of conceptual dependence that, like, we cannot make sense of, just as you can't really say that someone is a son, like a child with intrinsic nature, because that notion conceptually depends on there being a parent, and that you can't be a parent unless you have children. So you can't be a parent with intrinsic nature. But that's a conceptual dependence, right? A parent qua just person can exist, the person can exist without having children. They can't exist as a parent, but they can't exist, we can't apply the concept to them. But physically, let's say, they'll exist with their own causal powers, and so on. So I wonder if you would also like to say that this notion of conceptual dependence, which Madhyamaka thinkers put quite they put quite a lot of weight on in going that last extra step of saying everything is without swabhava, not just eternal things like the self or God, but that even what other Buddhists thought to be intrinsically real and causally efficacious, momentary physical entities, let's say, even those are not ultimately real, because not only are they causally dependent upon past causes, but that, conceptually speaking, we can also find some sort of conceptual dependence as well, and therefore they should be ruled out. So is there, in your seeing Madhyamaka, in your recommending Madhyamaka anti-foundationalism, does this kind of conceptual or nominal dependence also play a part?
Yeah, I can answer specifically. Not only, the answer is yes. And not only I find this interesting, but that's the thing that I found it interesting. I mean, I was less ignorant than I pretended about some aspect of Buddhist philosophy before reading Nagarjuna. And what I found remarkable is and relevant for quantum mechanics in Nagarjuna is exactly this further step that you say. That's what I found is astonishing. And let me connect it to quantum mechanics specifically, because one effort in trying to understand quantum mechanics is to sort of reduce it to elementary, discrete, separate manifestations, like how it's called Dhamma in or something like that, in the Buddhist tradition. And so you can take what the quantum mechanics are called the outcome of experiments, which are the single thing. Forget about any reality in between them, and try to view quantum mechanics as a description of the ensemble of these things here. And quantum theory, I don't want to go into the technical detail about the problems with individual quantum mechanics. it just doesn't work. You have to view this it's called a flash ontology in single events that make up reality as themselves relational to something else. And in quantum mechanics, they are simply relational to a system with respect with which they manifest themselves. The point in Nagarjuna is much wider. I mean, the lack of intrinsic existence is much wider. But then I found, so that's why somehow, but the Nagarjuna perspective allows me to do that. But then what it captured me is that in his discussion about the views, Nagarjuna takes the very representation of all that as dependent. And that's, I think, that's the aspect that captured me in that. It takes away a problem. It takes away a problem. And of course, one can, I mean, I know that there are some more sort of mystical ways of reading Nagarjuna, which I profoundly respect, and I don't. But from the specific perspective of a physicist interested in quantum mechanics, this is it. I mean, just get rid of the idea of this fundamental and elementary entity of realities as the proper way of describing the universe.
And get rid of a notion of, I don't know, discreteness, either in whatever takes place. Yeah, sure.
I mean, discreteness. I mean, I'm a defender of discreteness of space and time, and I made my career on discreteness of space and time. Mm-hmm. But you know, it's just conventional reality. That's not absolute reality.
Okay.
Right. So it's I know that this is made by atoms. I'm ready to debate strongly and defend the idea that this is made by atoms. But Nagarjuna would be very happy with that. I mean, in the frame of conventional reality, I can reduce this pen to atoms in some sense. But first of all, I'm losing something. And second, this is not the ultimate reality of the pen. It's just part of the interdependence. Is the aspect of the whole and the parts.
Good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we could go on for a very long time, but we have to keep this a certain amount so that people are not extremely tired either.
I'll try to answer, and we can try to answer shortly.
Maybe we should, however, try to meet one day somewhere, maybe in Dharamsala, hopefully.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Who knows? So I would like to, this was a bit short. It would be nice if we would have more discussion with Amit and Georgios, but maybe we'll leave it for another time. So that we can take a few questions from the audience. We have Andrea. Andrea, are you here? Yes. Can you unmute yourself? So Andrea had the task to go through the questions and to select a few. Maybe let's try a couple to begin with and we see.
Okay. Hi everybody. Thank you, Carlo and Barry, for this conversation. This meeting of two different cultures in a way. I tried my best to select the questions that seemed to me most on topic, relevant to discussion, and that I could understand. And maybe I will read them to you one by one. So first two questions at the beginning were about this idea of about relations making up reality somehow. So no independent existence, but existence independently. And Manu Srivastava asked, why doesn't identity count as a relation? So a relation of an object with itself to give an object intrinsic existence. And this, I think, is a question interesting both from the point of view of Buddhism and physics.
Nagarjuna takes up that identity relation actually extensively. And he makes some arguments that show a contradiction. For example, if something were identical with something else, if something were identical with itself, that means that agent and object would have to be identical, which is a contradiction. There are other contradictions of what he calls one and many. For example, if we look at Berry and what makes up Berry, so-called five aggregates, or the body and the mind, let's make it simple, body and mind. If we propose identity in that relationship between Berry and Berry's body and Berry's mind, then there's a problem of one and many. There's one Berry, yet there's two things when we look at body and mind. So those are some of the recurring that is some of the recurring logic that Nagarjuna uses to refute the relationship of identity.
Would somebody?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think identity, as far as I could tell, was really thought of as a relation that just as Barry mentioned, right? If you're going to be, so take a two-place relations were typically sort of understood as two-place things in Indian philosophy. So you have a causal relation, you have a cause, and in fact, you have an action. So you have an agent and an object. And so if the same thing were both agent and object, that would violate some basic principle in Indian grammar and in Indian philosophy or logic. So I don't really, can't think of a place where identity was considered in relational terms. Something has an identity if it has intrinsic nature or swabhava. There are other words for it too. It's its own particular nature. But yeah, it wasn't conceived of in relational terms. I don't know about the history of Indian mathematics, whether that would also be the case or not.
Andrea, you can go on with I leave it to you. You can take a couple of questions. We should finish in 10 minutes. Let's say 6:10.
Okay, another question by Johannes Kleiner was asking about the relevance of classical logic to reason about these things, about these topics, and in particular, is there like a search for a justification for using classical logic to explore something about existence and non-existence?
And I wonder, I mean, I'm not an expert on non-classical logics. I guess, Carlo, so some people will read Nagarjuna as allowing for the existence of true contradictions, that something can be both true and false at the same time. And Graham Priest is a philosopher who has a reading of Nagarjuna as under his dialethist logic, which allows for certain contradictions to be true. I don't think that actually works in the case of, I think Nagarjuna seems to presume the principle of non-contradiction in order to run these kinds of reductio ad absurdum type arguments by drawing contradictions and incoherencies within a given concept under analysis and then showing how it leads to contradiction, so we should reject that concept. Yeah, do you have any thoughts about quantum physics is sort of notorious for seeming to violate basic laws of logic, like say the law of non-contradiction or law of excluded middle, or and so on. And so do you think that our conventional logic, say classical logic, is if there is no ultimate reality for Madhyamaka or for your understanding of quantum physics / Madhyamaka, then should the tools of classical logic, what are the tools within conventional discourse, broadly speaking, as well, for capturing what Madhyamaka is saying or what quantum physics, as you understand it, are saying?
So yeah, let me answer specifically. Nagarjuna from one perspective can be viewed as a logician, right? And it's his way of presenting things. It's a characteristic of somebody who's a logician who uses logic. But from Western perspective, first impact, it sounds strange because his main tool is the tetra, it's called tetra, whatever.
Trilemma.
Tetralemma, which somehow presents the impossibility of four alternatives, one being A, something, I don't know, time exists, one being non-A, say time does not exist, and the third being neither A nor not A, and the fourth is both A and non-A. So it seems that, wait a moment, we are taught in Logic 101 that either A or not A, and tertium non datur, so the Aristotle beginning of logic. So it seems to be a clash here. My impression is that there's no clash, is that the known of non-A is not the same known as the Aristotelian known, and we can think of innumerable everyday experience in which there's four possibility. It's exactly what we would consider. So the exhaustive thing is these four possibility. I don't want to go technically specifically, but so it's not an alternative logic here. It's just a different way of using known. So I don't see any clash between what we call logic it's an interesting articulation, but not any it's not an applied logic. The same is true with quantum mechanics. People have been arguing that we can understand quantum mechanics by changing the logic. I find it, yeah, but I find it is not really particularly clarifying. It's true. I mean, the particle doesn't go here nor goes there. So if we think of these are two alternatives, quantum mechanics can be thought of, can be phrased an alternative logic. But all the alternative logic that I found, they can be rephrased in terms of logic with different definitions. So I don't think that this is the point. This is the answer to your question about logic.
You know, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, his main treatise, which we're talking about, Nagarjuna's text, it's very short, as you mentioned, Carlos. And some of the things that are not there, that are not written, that are implied, and also make it such a difficult text to understand, is that he's refuting many different schools of understanding an essence in reality. And so when he does the tetralemma, one of the usages is to be complete in terms of all the different, traditions or schools that are claiming some essence in reality, to refute them. And some do say that there's nothing, the neither alternative, and some say things do exist and do not exist, the both. So I think he's using that more pedagogically, if you will, to refute all possible understandings of an intrinsic existence. And that's some of the beauty of his work. And it's some of the difficulty in understanding it because, unless you're really well read and really understand fully all the different positions, it's hard to really know what he's doing at any one time.
I could comment on this because it could be interesting. So there is this sense in which Barry explained that somehow answering to all possible counter arguments at the same time. And there's also a very simple way that you can see that this is not really about a different logic. So take the double slit experiment in quantum mechanics. What's the point there? That you try to explain a certain set of experimental data by saying, where does a particle go? Does it go through slit A? Does it go through slit B? Does it go through both? Does it not go to neither? And none of these four possibilities explains what you're seeing on the screen. So what you do there is not that you've reached a conclusion that everything is wrong, is that you throw away the presupposition. What was the presupposition? That the particle is somewhere. So this is straightforward use of logic, it seems to me, that I don't see any weird logic going on there.
I suppose you also throw away the notion of a particle then, if particles are that which have to be somewhere.
No, you throw away the notion that it's an intrinsic reality.
Right.
That the particle is an intrinsic existence.
That's what Nagarjuna does, right? If you continue doing that, then you throw away everything. Yeah. I don't disagree with personally, if you ask me, I agree that there is no intrinsic reality. Yeah. In the sense that whenever you assume such a thing, you're going to fall into contradictions eventually.
I have another question, perhaps for Carlo. Do you think that, could you say a bit more about like how you view this lingering insistence on intrinsic reality or intrinsic nature in contemporary physics? Like how do you see it sort of inhibiting, or how, either historically or even in contemporary times, inhibiting current scientific progress on a given subject? Do you think like it has, you can pinpoint specific places where we actually need to abandon this presupposition in order to make progress on a given scientific problem, or is it sort of a general general obstacle, or like, or it's more we get a more elegant theory of physics if we abandon it, but or is there something like specific? Yeah.
Well, historically, realism has played both roles in science. I mean, as an obstacle to go ahead. I mean, from antiquity, the crystal sphere, the particles that made so difficult to accept Maxwell equations as they are, and others, but also has played a very useful role somehow. Hanging on to the notion, well, what is the real stuff there, has been very productive. I mean, think about kinetic theory of gases, for instance. So it's a balance, right? It's not useful to say, oh, get rid of your reality and study better. I mean, no. I mean, but that's the way science progresses. Of course, we would like to be super open to all possibilities, but we live within a conceptual structure. We cannot go out, we cannot cancel it, because then we're silent, which is fine if we just want to meditate, but not if we want to do physics. We are using a conceptual structure. So I think the issue is the issue of balance. I think that specifically in the interpretation of quantum mechanics, exactly in the same sense in which Einstein got clarity about the Lorentz transformation and these funny things about the speed of light by just pointing out a wrong assumption about reality, which simultaneity it's well defined. Here, the existing of an ontological state of things between two relative events is what it's a wrong conceptual assumption. So there's a certain specific notion of reality that it's preventing us for digesting quantum mechanics better. This is not the whole Nagarjuna criticism about ultimate reality, of course. It's a very specific partial use of it. But I think it plays a crucial role. In my work on quantum gravity, I wrote a lot about that. The notion of time as a primary, necessarily fundamental aspect of the world, the passing time. It's another. I think a lot of people are blocked on the idea that, oh, it's impossible to think about the world unless I think about some objectively existing time flowing and the past being different from the future, which is what Barry mentioned in one of his last comments. Once again, there, I find it wonderful and surprising that I need to do quantum gravity and to get rid of this distinction from past and future. And there is a tradition of thinking that says, look, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's compatible with our everyday view of reality. It's not against our everyday view of reality. So these are the two of the key aspects. Whether we do have other metaphysical assumptions that are wrong in thinking, in doing science, of course, yes, but who knows? I mean, maybe future. I don't think we can start from there. We should start from experiments, what goes wrong, and when we're in trouble, we say, well, maybe there's something wrong in our way of thinking.
I have another follow-up, a more broad follow-up. I don't know. I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but so
maybe Andrea has other questions. Or?
Yeah, by all means.
Let's take one more question, maybe from Andrea. I think we should, yeah, this discussion has to continue, but we should wrap up pretty soon.
Okay, so it's hard to choose. So there is a question about, so now we argued about reality being relational. And so somebody is asking, David Sale is asking, what is the relevance or perhaps the application of the concept of not one true reality in the context of people trying to come to agreement on various different issues? So I guess it's.
Even in science?
Well, the question is quite.
Can you repeat, Andrea?
So I guess. Yeah, sorry, did I cut? So the question was, what is the relevance, or better yet, the application of the concept of not one true reality in the context of people trying to come to agreement on various issues?
Well, I would say the interpretation of quantum mechanics is the big discussion. It's a huge discussion which is open and very, very alive, both in physics department and philosophy departments. And within that specific discussion, which I think is crucial for the advancement of science, we have to get more clarity about quantum mechanics to do quantum gravity, to do other things, and by itself. And that's the notion of what we mean by real. It's relevant, seems to me.
So I think the question was in the context of our polarized world where people don't talk to each other because they have different views. You know, they believe there's one true reality. And so, you know, if we can understand that there is no one true reality, that everything is relative, that, you know, we base our conclusions on what's real from the information that comes in. You know, if you watch certain news, you get a certain perspective on what's real. If you watch other news, you get a different perspective on what's real. So understanding that our notion of what's real is very much informed by kind of what comes in. And if we don't have other things coming in, we're going to have one view of a true reality. If we have other things coming in, so just knowing that, you know, if the heart and the mind are even a little bit open, you recognize that it's all quite relative, that it certainly depends on, you know, previous information, input, etc. So therefore, there is no one true reality. And therefore, you know, if you were to even go in that direction, it would be love. It would be compassion. It would be kindness. And so that people could actually sit down, even with differences, but have respect for each other in spite of differences. And that would begin to change this very polarized world where we have so much us and them and hate and violence. And, you know, it's important to return to what's common. And what's common is that we all want to be happy and none of us want to hurt. You know, it's love, it's compassion. And so when we return to that, you know, the notion and getting stuck in one reality and I'm right, you're wrong, begins to fade away. And so it's very important that that be put into our education system throughout the world, starting with kindergarten up. And there are school districts in some countries that are beginning to do that. I think it's really crucial for our survival as a, you know, civil society.
Can I make a comment here, Marius, to what Barry said? I fully agree. I think people resist to that because people are afraid that taking this position too strongly allows wrong thing, too many wrong things to be, and loses any notion of any possibility of us discussing and coming to an agreement about things. And I think it doesn't. So I think recognizing the difference of point of view doesn't mean that we should not, or we do not have the possibility of comparing our views and learning from one another and getting to a mutual understanding and a better step ahead. In other words, I'm happy to respect people who have views different from mine, but I also want them to tell me why I think I'm wrong and be able to tell them why I think they're wrong. And I'm confident that more often than not, this does bring us to, historically, that's what's happened constantly. And in fact, science is an incredible exercise of that. Accepting a different perspective, but then through discussion and through comparison, through dialectics somehow, getting to a better point of view that allows us to say, well, that was wrong, that was right. I was wrong, you were right, and so on, and learning more. And if we can do that in the spirit that you are saying, that would be best.
Okay, I want to bring one last question, and then I would like to give you the chance to briefly comment in whatever you have to say to all four of you. So this question is from our director here at the ICOKI, that Carlo knows very well. I think it's addressed more to Carla, but I will try to explain it. Is there an operational way to distinguish between inherent reality and conventional reality? So what the question is there, would there, let's assume that this existed, this, you know, ultimate essence, would there be any way to do an experiment and say, oh, that thing does not exist, but the conventional reality exists? That's sort of the question.
I think I would answer no.
You could not do an experiment if things existed inherently and intrinsically, because there could be no relationship, no experimenter, no experiment. Things could not function at all. I think that's, yeah. Please,
yeah, I
Carlos,
would agree.
sorry to interrupt.
No, I would agree entirely. So I would say no. This is not the point.
Right, you're both saying. So I didn't say the name, it was Czeslaw Bruckner, right? So the yeah, the answer is no for both of you.
But I would comment, there's no experiment that can check whether the Earth is the center of the universe or not. Nobody can think of the experiment that could ascertain whether the Earth is the center of the universe or not, right? And yet, I don't think anybody in their mind would think that this is a bad scientific question. It's a good scientific question that within science has a good answer, which is the Earth is not the center of the universe. But it has a good answer not because we make an experiment. It has a good answer because the conceptual structure that we use by taking the Earth not to be the center of the universe works far much better, allows us to understand more things. So science is not about you know, what I can measure or not measure. It's also about how to think about things. That's why I think there are interesting questions inside, like, is the Earth the center of the universe, which don't have a direct way of checking them empirically. Science is more than just checking things empirically.
Right, but
we talked about the double slit experiment and the Schrodinger, you know, thought experiment, the cat Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, and those two could, to some extent, I think, operationalize the question of, you know, conventional versus ultimate existence, because they're showing some observer relativity. So they're, you know, refuting the notion of something being objective and independent. So I think those could partially operationalize the distinction between conventional and ultimate reality.
yes.
Or another way, if I may add something, another way of seeing it, the distinction between conventional and ultimate reality is conventional reality. And if I'm reading Nagarjuna correctly, and the very distinction is very skillful means, when we're talking about ultimate reality, it's not something we can talk about. So everything that we are actually verbalizing is very much within conventional reality. There's no way that we could use verbalization or speech or conceptualization really to discuss something that's beyond conceptualization and beyond duality, right? I mean, that's my take on it. So it's a very interesting. Again, I think we must heed to Nagarjuna's warning that if we turn emptiness into a theory, we are incurable. There is no cure for anyone who will take these teachings, these insights, and turn them into a model of reality. There will be no cure for that person. And I think that's a very interesting comment that Nagarjuna makes.
Chapter 8,
Yes.
the views. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
That's a very beautiful understanding. I would argue with one small point. I mean, I think it's a wonderful understanding from my perspective. We can talk about ultimate reality, but that's not ultimate reality. It is conventional reality. Just one fine thing difference there, Georgios.
Yes. Thank you, Barry. You're refining it much better. Yes.
I may be right, I may be wrong, but anyway, that's kind of from my perspective. Yeah.
Is there any final comment by anyone? I personally found this very interesting, and I think we could go on for hours. We're already at 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's a good point to stop and reflect, and I hope there is going to be something, a follow-up of this of some kind.
Yes.
I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to Barry, to all of you. Thank you very much for this.
I'm also very grateful to you, Carlo. It's been really wonderful to get to know you this way and exchange ideas this way. I've learned a lot. And Marios, thank you very much for moderating and coordinating all of this. And Georgios and Amit and Andrea for joining in, adding your expertise and your brilliance. I think it rounds it out into a very beautiful discussion, and it does need to be continued. I agree.
Can the questions be saved on a file, Marius, so
yes,
we can get to read them? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I wanted to say that I'm sorry to everybody that asked questions and we didn't take them, but I will send everything to Carlo and Barry, and if they have the time, they can get back to you. So thank you all for joining. Thank you very much. It was lovely, and hope to see you in some island again soon, or
yes,
somewhere else.
I hope you come to visit us, Mario. Yes,
I will try.
Yes,
or in that Dharamsala. We will see.
Yes, you're very welcome in Dharamsala.
So take care, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye. That was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea, also for the questions.
Bye-bye.
Bye.